more on this in the week.
Yeah. We're going to
as the week goes
all
on,
of these, and
we're going to we're just going to recap holiday recap here for like what kind of came out this weekend. All right. I'm kind of like in love with that Toronto trade I made. Like I've like
did you
turned that into.
It doesn't matter, but who did you include Barnes in it?
It was Barnes, OG, Trent, and like a pick, and like one
like,
pick. And I'll explain to everybody why. I want to explain too at some point in this about why the Gobert and DeJounte Murray trades are not comps for like what the Nets are going to get back here.
Yeah. There's like, and they're already speculating that like, yes, they made that initial trade, Timberwolves, but they could also turn around and make a second trade and shove them all together and send out some of those picks, which will then water down what looks like this, insane amount of haul or whatever. So like everything can be like kind of
those trades didn't send any players back. So like
right. That's what it was too. Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. I can already tell it's loud outside for me, but whatever.
All right, recording in GarageBand. The NBA does not respect the holiday weekend, apparently, because trade speculation is running rampant around, of course, Kevin Durant, of course, Kyrie Irving. And now the teams that are getting mentioned, like the Phoenix Suns, like the Toronto Raptors, we knew about the LA Lakers. It is just creating a swath of opportunities for us to break down what could be a seismic shift in the NBA overall, and of course, for the Brooklyn Nets. Break it down right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR, covering you for all your daily fantasy sports ranking needs. DraftKings, FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants all off-season long on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms, and let you know today's episode is going to be brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline is got you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And Douglas, sir, where we start? You tell me, Doug. You want to talk West Coast action? You want to go Middle America? Maybe we'll travel down south, take a dip down in the bayou by New Orleans. We've got plenty of opportunities to break down what we anticipated. Once Kevin Durant requests a trade, turns out a lot of teams might be interested.
Yeah, I mean, and the question is going to be, are the Nets interested in what the teams want to send back? I think that this is, things are real. Adam is like a trade machine wizard. He's like, lives half his life on the trade machine. I would say I only start firing the old trade machine up when it starts to get real. And I do feel like we are in the real territory here. But I think it's, with the Kevin Durant scenario, which we're going to go through all different aspects of what's been sort of floated out there about what could end up coming back as a return. I do think that there's going to be a situation that we're going to talk about over the next couple weeks, maybe weeks, maybe days, who knows, about, yes, teams are interested. The question now is going to be how interested and how interested the Nets are in getting back whatever kind of return the other team can send back to still remain, so they can remain championship viable. This is a very tricky situation right now. And when you start to factor that stuff in, and you factor in where Kevin Durant wants to go, which I can't even believe that this is part of it too, then I'm actually not sure how many scenarios there are out there. And who the Nets can't take in because of contracts. It's a crazy situation right now.
And there is, we're going to go through Phoenix. We're going to talk about Toronto. We're going to talk about, obviously, Kyrie Irving and the Los Angeles Lakers. But all of these scenarios that we'll end up referencing back to, we're going to try to line up some crossovers during the week. They're all going to end up also saying, yes, a third team involved, right? So there's going to be some element of to make the money work, to maybe just get some contracts on the book. So there's always going to be a little bit of guesswork around these things. But the baseline framework of what Brooklyn gets back and where Kevin Durant or Kyrie Irving end up is what we're going to take a look at today. The other thing I'll just quickly say before we get to the Phoenix one is the idea. I know that I've been seeing this a lot from the Nets fan base of just keep them, refuse to trade them, and then they'll all come back together and we'll sort it out behind the scenes and everything will be okay in the end. I don't think that I don't think that that's possible to have happen. Two, the idea that if you refuse to trade them because they're under contract and on the opt-in for Kyrie, and you go, hey, your best chance to win is here. We can talk about the lineups and how exciting that is. But that's also assuming that every other scenario where some type of, of discontent on all sides is involved, name one of those instances where they're like, yeah, but we pulled it together and we won a championship and then we went our separate ways. Like that premise, I just think is littered and riddled with flaws to then say that it's worth it to keep Kevin Durant and keep Kyrie Irving here now that we are at this point.
Yeah. By the way, you can count me in the camp of still holding out a little bit of hope that they're able to reconcile this. I don't think it's likely. I would not bet anything but long odds on it. I don't think that is totally over, but it's probably pretty close to over. But
so if you said 7% chance that they can keep this thing together, I'm putting a percentage on it, right? Okay. 7% chance they can keep it together. Now, what percentage chance do you think that in that 7% chance of keeping it together, that they also go on to be in the finals? Because if they can't get to there in this 1 year window, it's not like, okay, the 7% chance worked out and now we'll sort things out with Kyrie. Like, again, I still think it's only a 1 year stopgap.
Probably.
It's like, the Nets trying to steal a year of success, right?
Yes. Yes. It would be hoping against hope that you could like right the ship in terms of personalities and everyone kind of comes together. Though I said this before on the podcast, though, the one comp with this was Kobe asking out and the Lakers just didn't do it. And they came back and they won, right?
And
like,
the Lakers had championships with Kobe Bryant. Like, they had something to reference back to. No, but and before that too, right? They got to say, we've done this before, Kobe. Like, you can't go anywhere, and don't worry, we'll get this there. Whereas the Brooklyn Nets they're saying, hey, look, see that disaster we had for 3 years? Don't worry, we're going to get this turned the other way.
It's not likely. It's not likely, but I do think in this era, I still would put these are sort of volatile personalities. When volatility reigns, like you can go back to something that's close to normal.
Sure.
Excuse me. But like, I don't think it's likely at all. But I do think, because let's talk about this Phoenix piece of it, because I think this is where, like, this is the part where I start to think, how likely is it, is when Kevin Durant's supposedly preferred landing spot is with the Phoenix Suns.
Yep.
The Phoenix Suns do have pieces to send back, but I think they would say that it's just not enough. So like, the Nets would say it's not enough. So I do wonder around at what point the staring contest becomes, if Phoenix offers DeAndre Ayton, Cam Johnson, and like a bunch of salary fodder and 4 picks or something like that. Right. And the Nets just say no, right? Like, we want to have Mikal, like we want to say Mikal, it's got to be Mikal Bridges, Ayton, or don't even call back. Like, that could be a situation that does kind of like bleed itself into the season because it just isn't palatable. Because like, how do you feel about that deal? I mean, you could probably hear it from my voice, but I like an Ayton, and they're saying they don't even want to include Bridges because they kind of need Bridges for that championship run also. Like, what are we talking about here?
Well, that's one of the big parts about this too. As some type of mosquito is trying to get inside my mouth. It's fine though, guys. We'll be good over on YouTube. That's the problem too, is the team that you're trading to. So the Phoenix Suns in this instance, well, okay, you accept that it didn't look like Ayton was going to stay there long term. Remember, there was some speculation that the Nets could be in pursuit of DeAndre Ayton. That was when they had Kevin Durant here. It was to add to Kevin Durant in this championship run. The Nets don't want DeAndre Ayton in one of these deals. They want to have, to your point, Mikal Bridges, and then this is where we say a third team gets involved and you get some other players in there, the draft capital. And as we've said the last couple of episodes, this also comes down to the Brooklyn Nets needing to bring in talent to still be competitive. It's not just the draft capital that gets you there. It has to be the talent as well. So I mean, just on its surface of, let's say, Phoenix comes to the table and this is a 1-to-1 deal. We want to get Ayton over to you. We want to get Cam Johnson and a slew of picks. I understand why Brooklyn doesn't want that, because I don't know what that looks like going forward. Cam Johnson, okay, he's a fine player, but DeAndre Ayton, even, is that a cornerstone piece that you're building around? He's the right age. You're going to have the longevity when he has on the sign-in trade, but I don't look at him as being a franchise-changing player, and that's also something the Nets have put out there. We want a superstar or a guy with superstar potential to come back in here, so we know we're putting a cornerstone in place for us to build going forward. And I'll tell you another thing. One thing that probably hesitates around DeAndre Ayton is the fact that the effort has been something that has been questioned during his early part of his career in Phoenix, and you're on a team that's going deep in playoff runs and playing for championships. How much confidence do I have in bringing in a player like that to a team that is not going to be short-term, deep playoff run successful?
Well, and the most hilarious part about it is the Suns. Like, how do the Suns have any leverage in trading DeAndre Ayton? They don't want to resign DeAndre Ayton. Like, they have the opportunity to give DeAndre Ayton essentially the max. They've had 2 years to do it. They've said they don't want to do it. But the part where it's like, oh, we don't want to do it, but that'd be great for you guys. Like, I don't even know how you have that conversation.
And that's why Brooklyn should be wary, right? We always say the team that has the player knows them the most intimately. So when that team is like, we're not so sure about him, but you guys are going to love him.
Look, would a team of Ben Simmons, DeAndre Ayton, Joe Harris, Seth Curry, and another shooter, could that team make the play-in? Like, maybe, right? Like, you'd have to really squint to see, like, championship equity 0, obviously, but like maybe you add Bridges to that, and then you need another guard. Like, could that team make the play-in in the East? It would be close, but that's kind of like what you're talking about. Like you mentioned before, which we've also mentioned many times, but just as a reminder, the Nets trading, like, the Nets cannot tank. Okay. They have to get players back. Just as a quick reminder, and then we'll move on to the Toronto thing. As a quick reminder, the Nets, there is no incentive for them to tank for a better draft pick. All their better draft picks through either the picks themselves or swaps go to Houston. Yep. So even if they stink, they're just making Houston better. They have to get players back to just try to rebuild something and sell some tickets, because they have to make some money. Like, they have to have people show up at Barclays. Yep. And so, like, between those two things, there has to be, and whatever, like, Sai comes out and says, like, oh, I'll take a 40 win team, because guys, I mean, that's a total piece of, I not want to lose the explicit tag, but like saying that kind of stuff is like the worst possible thing the owner could say. But but in general, the point where they have to be like a 42 win team to try to make the playoffs is a real thing, because getting draft picks back, or excuse me, they own none of their draft for like the next 5 years. So there's no point. So we can just stop the they can tank piece, because I've seen people mention. All right, I want to get into the Toronto stuff. We got to obviously talk about Kyrie here. Oh my God, there's so much happening with the Nets. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at betonline.net. You're a number one source for all of your betting needs, all of your sports info. It didn't take long, folks. BetOnline has now dropped the Nets to, wait for it, 13th in championship odds right now, plus 4,000, equal with the New Orleans Pelicans. Maybe that's a trade partner too. I don't even want to tell you this. Number one on betonline.net, Phoenix Suns plus 600. So maybe they know something that we don't. That's kind of stuff you're going to find now at betonline.net, your best spot for all sports scores, podcast news as well. They got covered over the weekend. If you're getting into MMA, maybe some golf, maybe some boxing, obviously MLB rolling every single day on BetOnline. Head on over to betonline.net right now. You can learn about all the trends and all the action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Very quickly, before we get into the Toronto Raptors package, if, we're talking about just on the Phoenix side of it, if it was a world where, and again, I safely presume that a third team would get involved here, but if you were the Brooklyn Nets and you added in Joe Harris with Kevin Durant going to Phoenix, and this is now, and then that's what gets you back Bridges, let's say, right? Along with the picks. Right. So now you're going to get Cam Johnson, Bridges, Ayton, and picks, but you'll be sending back to a team that wants to win a championship. Well, here's a sharpshooter on the outside, right? Just on its face right there, would that be something that would make you more enticed to take that deal coming from Phoenix, knowing, hey, we get the guy that we maybe really is the linchpin of this and makes our nucleus pretty strong here in the short term?
I just wouldn't acquiesce at all. You're trading them Kevin Durant. Like, you can just give up some players. You're trading Kevin Durant with 4 years left on his contract. You're allowed to send other good players back. The part where Durant has the Nets over a barrel, like, I get it, but the other part where it's like, hey, we'll just send you like one guy who we didn't want. Like, just say no. Just say no. Like, the part where like the Nets have to sweeten the pot. Are you nuts? Like, why are the Nets sweetening the pot at all? You're getting the guy. You're getting the guy you want. Pair him with Chris Paul. Win a championship. Great. Everyone can hold hands, sing Kumbaya, and it'll be all fun in Phoenix. You just have to be able to send other players back. This part where. And by the way, we'll get to a Kyrie. The part where the Nets like need to include money for like a Russell Westbrook, I almost just threw up. Like, I can't even I can't even get into it. But the part I will say, there's a trade that I can get into here though,
and that would be the Toronto Raptors, right? Which, by the way, and we have some crossovers coming up this week that could expand this thing out into a 3-party deal, where maybe DeAndre Ayton doesn't ultimately end up on the Brooklyn Nets, but everything kind of goes the way that Kevin Durant might prefer. From Toronto, however, and this is the one that, like you say, you can get behind. There's a lot of different iterations of this.
Yeah.
I think the one that you're going to focus on is centered around Scottie Barnes coming back to Brooklyn, which I think, at least right now, in all of these discussions and all these possible teams being involved, Barnes is the superstar potential talent that the Brooklyn Nets would be looking for in one of these trade scenarios, which is what I think makes this package enticing.
Yeah, so threw it out over the weekend, seen some other iterations of this. It was basically Barnes, Scottie Barnes, OG Anunoby, and Gary Trent, who helps make the money work for Kevin Durant straight up. That's the whole deal. Maybe, I had a million comments about this. Maybe the Nets asked for like 1 or 2 picks. I will say this is just a good reminder about those people out there that are you. And I did it too, as sort of as a joke, but where Rudy Gobert's trade, where let's just call it 5 picks right now. It was like, I'm calling it 5 picks because it was 4 picks plus they traded this year's first, and some swaps in there, or the DeJounte Murray, where it was 1 million picks. None of those trades involved sending any talent back. There was like money that went back, like Malik Beasley and guys like this, but no real talent went back. In a deal like this with Toronto, where you were getting the rookie of the year, a 24-year-old OG Anunoby, who maybe you can dream on some upside for him in a different scheme offensively, and like Gary Trent, whatever. But that does not beget having to get a 5 picks back from Toronto, I don't think, with a 34-year-old Kevin Durant coming back to them. Like, because as much as we don't want to talk about this, Durant is not exactly a spring chicken here, and has not
there's
played
a shelf
ton.
life. Yeah, there's
like,
a shelf life.
maybe like 2 years of peak left, 3 years tops of peak, maybe more. Like, that's what they're looking at. So I still want the full package for Durant. Don't get me wrong, but if you get a guy like Barnes back and OG, you don't need to get as many picks back. 1 to 2 picks, I think that would be fair. I just want to make sure people aren't using the Gobert thing as like hey, you should get 7 picks back from him because that's what Gobert got. You have to factor in talent coming back too, which Toronto can send back more than some of these other teams.
Yeah, and there's already been discussions around the NBA that depending on what Utah does next around Donovan Mitchell, or depending on what the next move potentially for the Timberwolves could be with some of their roster, that you hear these announcements of these trades, but they can still then add in an additional trade, move more money around, bring in more players, and it ends up they can turn that 2-team trade into a 3-team trade, into a 4-team trade, to make sure that additional moves can all work. So you don't know where necessarily all these assets are going to end up, which can
can I just say one more thing about and the reason I'm like okay with this Toronto thing is like you get way younger, you get a decade younger to start, right? Yeah. Like you get a decade younger with some of these guys. You have like switchable defenders who have some offensive game. Like you can think about a world where like you can run some offense through Barnes. A Barnes-Simmons pairing would be weird, but it's okay. Like they would still be able to win some games. You're not winning the championship, this team, but you reset on a new timeline where you can start envisioning a new future, right? Like it's like we'll win some games. If we had some shooters around these guys, that would be not the worst thing ever. Like they would cause some defensive chaos and they would probably be like a 500 team. But they would at least have a future. Like they would have something that you could envision building around that you could then start bringing in. You could start bringing in more guys. So that's like where that one's a little different.
Yeah. So the one thing, okay, you're saying OG, Barnes, and Trent Jr., right? That's the 3 players coming back for Brooklyn.
Yeah, but I'm really saying Scottie Barnes,
yes,
then OG Anunoby, then Gary Trent, because it helps the dollars.
Yeah, and this is what's interesting because when you go back and then look at this and you say, okay, let's take a look at the Toronto Raptors now. They have Kevin Durant, they have Siakam, and then Fred VanVleet, and then they have this mix, players, right? They have some value, they have some talent there, but you're stripping away those 3 assets. And to your point, I know, right? The Nets, hey, you got to ask for it. You want it. You want value back. It's Kevin Durant. I do wonder though, because you mentioned also about the picks piece of it, where I think it gets a little bit interesting and maybe there's some need for flexibility from the Brooklyn Nets. The first thing I want to ask you is a yes or no answer. Does Barnes have to be in the deal for you to make it?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So, it's like, so that's going to be interesting what Toronto says about that. But after that point though, then I think it becomes, if it's Scottie Barnes, then I think maybe you're not getting OG in it, right? Because then you're talking about Siakam and OG with Kevin Durant or Trent Jr., one of these 2 things. So I do wonder if it ends up being 2 players in there, and if Barnes ends up being, that's the crown jewel of it, and then we'll take any number of other opportunities. if the Brooklyn Nets would be comfortable with that. And then you throw in a couple of picks maybe as
The
well.
reason I will say the reason OG gets thrown in there, not only from the talent piece, is like there is a money aspect. Barnes makes no money at that.
Starting at 17. Yeah,
exactly. Like at that point, you actually do have to send some money back. Like OG helps in a couple facets here. Like he helps because you get some younger talent back that's kind of cost controlled. But at some point, you do have to match the salary. And Toronto doesn't have like a ton of these matching salary kind of contracts to send back. And so that's like where Bridges and like Ayton re-signing, like those guys would start to send like enough money back. And I think they had a couple of like campaign. They had some other like random salary fillers that they could do. The Suns, the Raptors didn't have tons of dudes like that. Like they just signed Boucher, but like he can't be traded for 6 months now. So there's, because of that, that is where like OG helps a couple of different things. OG helps pad the money enough to get it there because Trent alone doesn't get it there. And then otherwise you have to send a bunch of other like randoms back. So that was where like he does become not pivotal to the conversation, but pretty important. But on his own, he is not good enough. So that's where like that package to me sort of coalesced into a one thing. And this is also where I was saying, this is where you don't have to send $1 million picks worth of draft capital. The other example that people will give is the Anthony Davis trade. The Anthony Davis trade where the Lakers sent back Ingram, Randall, Josh Hart. Randall wasn't in there. It was definitely Ingram, Lonzo, Josh Hart came back in that trade, and $1 million. No, I'm not sure. I should just look it up. But and $1 million picks. That one was deemed a complete and utter overpay at the time, and Davis was just way younger. Like it was a slightly different situation there. Davis was 24 at the time, 25 at the time. Like it's not exactly the same exact comp either because of the age. You have to factor in the age a little bit here. Like I know we want to see Kevin Durant as being a piece that you can win a championship with. And that is true. You can do that right now. 3 years from now, though, there's a world where based on the injury history and just random relative age curves, that he's at a different timeline than some of these other guys. So that has to be factored in a little bit. And smart GMs are going to factor that a little bit. And I'm sure that's what they're saying. They're saying, hey, look, like he's just not, this isn't Anthony Davis getting shipped out when he was 25 or whatever. Like he is older. He has a bunch of NBA miles on him. He has a torn Achilles on his resume. He was injured a lot of last year. Like this is not exactly a pillar of health, even with how good he is. So I'm just trying to make it realistic for everybody.
Oh, of course. Well, by the way, I'm very interested to think about too, because the one thing, specifically when it comes to Toronto, right? They went for Kawhi Leonard, but it's like what all good teams do though. Yeah, we got Kawhi Leonard and we won a championship, but we also didn't mortgage anything in terms of where we were going to be long-term. I only bring that up to say, because I was curious around the idea of like playing with all this stuff. Listen, Scottie Barnes is the jewel. And then the next one is you want to get OG and there's flexibility and the money. But I also played around with the idea of Siakam being involved in this trade and leaving OG alone and potentially even potentially leaving Barnes alone. In this instance, you're talking about getting some draft capital, then coming back with maybe Siakam and a Gary Trent Jr., maybe throw in Precious Achiuwa, who's still a young player, low cost, and then some picks and capital where, again, now is that the brighter, long-term future for the Brooklyn Nets? No, because Siakam is not young, closer to 27, 28 years old at this point. But you then like this maybe feels like the signal to Nets fans as well, to your point about like, yes, he is Kevin Durant, but yes, he is 34 years old. Yes, other teams want him to go win a championship. And they also want to look at their roster and say, who are the most valuable pieces that we need to keep to win with Kevin Durant? So I wonder if something like that, which will need to involve kicking out some money at some point, could be viable for Brooklyn.
And this is again with this, everything's like a slippery slope with this. It's where every team's going to evaluate their own ability to win later. The Siakam piece, I'd have to think about that one in a different way. I just want to say one thing. I know we're going to switch over to Kyrie Irving. The one thing about Kawhi, only because you mentioned him, the Kawhi situation. Remember, it's easy to forget now. That situation was actually totally different, also because Kawhi was sitting out, and there was confusion about his medical. Like he was not playing. There was disagreements about what his medical situation was. That his team is like a total vault. You never know what is going on with him. And there was so much mystery surrounding Kawhi that deal in retrospect, and he only had 1 year left on the deal. Yep. So when they just send DeRozan back, and I think a pick or two, it was very little that they sent back for Kawhi overall. But that situation was clouded in so much mystery that it was it was very unclear about what exactly you were getting with him. And it was unclear if he was even going to stay a year, by the way, which he didn't. He left. He won the championship. They did the exact thing which you think would keep a guy, which is win the championship. He was like, nope, see you later. So like that situation's another one, which is hard to comp because it just had so many more different moving parts than even this Durant one did.
Of course. Let's get into, and you're right. And that's why some of these reference points are always good to remember. It's like, go back to when it happened though. And what were the
They're all
circumstances
different.
around
They're all
it?
different.
All
like,
different. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get into the LA Lakers connection, obviously, with Kyrie Irving and what that could look like. The least appetizing of the offseason moves for the Brooklyn Nets. We're after we tell you about, though, our friends over at Rock Auto. Why? Swapping out players, swapping out pieces, swapping out parts on your car. Everybody knows you can walk into your local auto parts store. The guy can walk back there, find a random part. You don't know if it's the right piece. You know you're getting charged an extremely high price. Why not save 30, 50, or even 100% more than what you're going to spend out there in those stores by going to rockauto.com. Easy to navigate drop-down menu. It's a family-run business that's been doing it for do-it-yourselfers like you and me. You hop over there right now, find your car, find the make, find the model, and find the part that you need. You go ahead and punch in Locked On in their How Did You Hear About Us box so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. So, and I do agree with you just on the point as we talk about Kyrie Irving a bit here. These reference points are interesting. And by the way, maybe the one thread to pull off of the Kawhi Leonard thing was, as you said, he was staying away from the team. There was issues around the way his injuries were managed. He was disgruntled with the franchise. For everyone saying, just tell these guys they got to stay here and they got to play. Well, then you could find them sitting out. And then all of a sudden, that value on that trade market, like right now, because I think we'll probably run a little bit long on this one. This is the least sexy conversation on the podcast here. The one thing is, too, is like, I know there is no reason why the Brooklyn Nets need to try to get Kevin Durant to the Phoenix Suns where he may want to go, or to get Kyrie Irving to the LA Lakers. But we've always talked about it still is about reputation. And while this may not have worked out, it behooves the Brooklyn Nets to get these done sooner than later and save a little bit of face around. Listen, it didn't work with us, and we all were frustrated. And we still got Kevin Durant to Phoenix because that's where he said he wanted to go, right? Like we still did the thing that is right by the player. And we said, man, what a rough run. We hope the best for you guys and for ourselves as well. That being the case, Lakers, are you interested in some Russell Westbrook, $47 million? Mwah.
No, not at all. Like, I'm not interested. No one's interested in Russell Westbrook at this number. He's like, he gets paid a ton. He was a negative by every available metric last year. Like the one I've heard pushback online in my own feed about like, oh, he has a skill that's called durability. Great. Him being durable made the Lakers worse last year. The more he played, like the more he negatively impacted their team, whether it was a bad fit or not. The part where it's like $47 million for 1 year and you're just done with it, and like you just like reset some of your cap. Okay, like could you and I podcast for a year about Russell Westbrook, the Russell Westbrook show? Sure, right? Like, is it making your team better? I guess it's like, oh my God, I can't even say this. You can, I guess on effort with like the right shooters around, shooters around it, like you could, and like a rim running center, you could maybe make the play in, probably not. But if it's just because you got to get rid of Kyrie and that's just the situation you're in and it's just a toxic asset and literally nobody else wants him at this number, then I just don't know. Like, I don't know what else you do. The part where they need to like throw in Joe Harris to make the money work or whatever, that is the part where it starts to completely lose me, because I've seen that floated. To take Westbrook back on this number to give them Kyrie, you have to get the Lakers' final 2 picks that they have. They have 2 more first-round picks. Hope they are absolutely terrible going out in like 4 years from now or whenever those picks convey. Like that's the only way you can do it, and there is a world where the Lakers totally stink. Like these guys they all sunset. LeBron moves on. AD asks out. Kyrie is, living wherever he's going to live on an island somewhere or whatever. So like that's the one part where I can like kind of talk myself into it. But like as in terms of making your team better or making your young players better, no, that's just not going to happen. There's no evidence. There's no evidence of Russell Westbrook doing that for the players that he plays with. There's no evidence of him changing his game to play with even the best players, because we saw this last year with LeBron James. Nothing changed. It was a complete disaster. It was just one brick after another and just him doing Russell Westbrook things. And it was bad, but Kyrie doesn't want to play with you and he makes a lot of money and nobody else wants him. So you're stuck. I don't know what you do with the situation.
Well, and this is so, and a little bit like I'll talk about on the other side of it. Do I think it's important from a perceptual standpoint around the league to get Kevin Durant to where he wants to go? Yes, I do. Do I think it's as critical to get Kyrie where he wants to go? No, I do not. I'll also
Nobody
say
wants him. Nobody
that
wants
Kyrie
him.
Irving
Sorry to interrupt.
on the plan option. Oh,
Like,
and here, no, but here's the one thing. Here's what I will say though, and I was thinking about this, and I was a little curious to get your take on it before we get out the door. Kyrie Irving is on the player option, right? So now, whatever you're going to be able to get back, and this is where I think the Nets should be looking around the league and probably making more calls than they're fielding as far as Kyrie Irving goes. I'll use the example that was floated early on in the offseason, went away around the sign and trade, now maybe could come back. The Dallas Mavericks, who have been losing a lot of their point guard play. If you're the Dallas Mavericks, and again, the cost is not going to be this Kevin Durant type package. We're looking for a player. We're looking for a pick, right? Like whatever it may look like, some combination thereof. If you're Dallas or any of these teams and you say I'm only taking Kyrie Irving for a 1-year rental, and the package I'm willing to give you is going to reflect that. Kyrie Irving will be gone at the end of this season from my team. However, in that 1 year, maybe it gets me from the Western Conference Finals to the finals. Maybe it gets me an extra round deeper. And for certain franchises, like that really matters. That can be a critical movement for some of these teams. And that's where I do wonder if we start to hear a little bit of conversations around, hey, if you're talking about a 1-year rental at $36 million and you give up a reasonable prospect who isn't necessarily in the superstar mold and maybe a pick, right? Maybe a couple of draft assets. I can see teams being a little bit more interested in that now, as opposed to when it was Kyrie Irving is being allowed to seek a sign and trade. That is far less attractive to me. If I'm another team in the league committing 3 or 4 years, 5 years, max dollars to Kyrie, that's not attractive. But 1 year stopover, like Kawhi Leonard for 1 year in Toronto, yeah, I can wrap my head around that. And I think the Nets should explore that, because if it comes down to both these players being gone, you'll get excited about the core that you get back, hopefully, from the Kevin Durant trade, and you may have to accept that what Russell Westbrook is going to be on this team. And I don't even know at that point that the Nets may say you need not be a part of this team. Like a year from now, the money comes off the books. Maybe we don't want you to be out there being a durable player and not necessarily providing any value to this team, maybe beyond the production and where you can go in terms of making the playoffs. But even at that, if I get a quarterback from the Durant trade, I don't need Westbrook to step out there. I'll let him sit out and avoid any issues that he could bring up.
Okay, so there's a lot. There's a lot.
Digest all of it, and when you got about 30 seconds.
It's okay. Okay, so I can comment on all this stuff pretty quickly. So, just to rewind real quick. So back to Dallas. So I could see that, like, Brunson out the door. We saw that, like, an on-ball creator can actually live next to Luka. Like, Kyrie is, multiple times better than Brunson. Like, so, and we've seen that Kyrie, who doesn't want to be an on-ball creator necessarily himself in terms of initiating offense, but like how well he functioned with Harden, you can actually it's not a leap to look at that situation and be like, oh man, that could actually be awesome offensively. Those two guys like dictating a lot of the offense, Kyrie working off ball and then just like getting the right matchup and then just cooking people, for sure. They would play faster with him. Like, I could see it. And I will say Dallas has some guys they could send back where you're like, okay, I could probably flip these guys for something else later. Like, you could do like Hardaway and Dorian Finney-Smith, right? Mm-hmm. Is it super sexy? No. Would I rather have those two guys than Russell Westbrook? Definitely. Right. So you
can have Spencer Dinwiddie back with 2 years.
Well, he's another one. I purposely didn't throw him in there, but they have Dinwiddie in there. But they actually have some contracts that wouldn't be the end of the world to get. By the way, I'd take Dinwiddie over Westbrook. So like it would be
functional players that you can live with for now, and the short-term deals, or also movable, like guys that have 2 years left. You can say Spencer Dinwiddie for a year, and then we can move you in year 2 with a nice number to another team.
Like Dinwiddie and Hardaway, or like whatever. Like they have more contracts like this.
Some of the bigs, with the stockpile they have there, Powell, Bertans, etc.
Bertans, like, are they making it tons better? No. Like, are they guys that you can like maybe turn into something? They play, you give them a little more playing time and they turn into something. Like, I don't know. There's you can at least dream on that situation. There's no dream to be had with Westbrook. I know exactly how it's going to work. Like, we have plenty of time on this. We have a big enough sample size to know exactly how that's going to work. This is why, yes, are these names as good? I'm putting this in quotes, and as good as Russell Westbrook? No, I guess not. From a cachet and name brand standpoint, from a team building standpoint, you'd much rather have these guys back. Yes. And yes, can Dallas like make a case to do it? The problem is it's a Kyrie problem though. Like, it's such a risk. It's such a risk. Like, it takes nothing for this guy to like he's a total wild card. Yes, I get that there's been like all context behind these things. We've said this a gajillion times on the podcast. We get it. But there is just a feeling around the league now that you are playing with fire when you have Kyrie Irving. He asked out of Cleveland. He left Boston. He sat out multiple games. There's been confusion about injuries. There's confusion about whether he's going to play or not. He stood his ground on something that he believed in with the vaccine. He still stood his ground and didn't play and forewent money. Like, there is enough on the checklist to make Dallas worry. And a 1-year rental on Kyrie Irving to win a championship, like that you could talk yourself into it. So I don't know. That's where
I think it opens up some possibilities, and it'll be interesting to see. As we said, some crossovers coming up this week. We'll digest the third teams that can be involved here in some of these deals. There's already some other, maybe a reunion for one Kevin Durant and some friends out on the West Coast. So there'll be plenty to break down all week long. We'll of course be doing it here.
All right, yeah, make sure you subscribe over to YouTube. Just 1 million YouTube views this weekend. Not 1 million, but like relatively speaking, 1 million for us. So many comments, so appreciative. Hit subscribe over on YouTube. Make sure you give Adam Armbrecht, at Doug Norrie, a follow also on Twitter. Much appreciated. We're dialing it up over on Twitter too right now. Talk about that. So subscribe to YouTube. Go follow on Twitter as well.
Listen, man, a lot of possibilities on the trade market. Kind of makes you feel like saying to infinity and beyond. Buzz Lightyear.
Tim Allen version.
Yes,
One of the all-time great
please.
poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.